Good evening.
Good evening, Rabbi.
Thank you. So we're going to continue a bit, Yosef, I think. It says over here, Rosh Beperek Kam the Shabbat. Says the Rosh in Shabbat, the first parak, Kitab the Tama den mafligin pachot migimot yamim. He says the reason why we don't go less than 3 days when we sail before Shabbat, Kodam Shabbat, Mishum Oneg Shabbat, because of the Oneg Shabbat, which is the pleasures. Kedivi Arif, like the Rif, he says, well, if he's ben Naharota Novein, because according to this, he says, when he comes to, right, as we said, the flowing rivers, Share will be allowed. So in a different place, he writes like the Ri, that if he tamon ben neharot hanovein nami asur. According to his reasoning, it would be forbidden even in the rivers. ושמש לומר שהראש לא כתב כדברי הארי, אלא לאסור להיכנס בספינה בשבת. So he says, perhaps the Rosh only wrote this not to go to board the ship on Shabbat itself, עצמה. אבל לאסור להפליג ג' ימים קודם, but to forbid, to go 3 days before, within 3 days before. סבירה לדלא סגי haytama. So there he holds that it's not really enough, right, this reason to forbid. אלא משום ביטול עונג שבת. Rather, the reason is because of עונג שבת. ואם לא כן, לא הווה שתיק בפרק כמה דשבת. So he says, otherwise he wouldn't have been silent. First parak of Shabbat, מדברי רי, from measuring the words of the Ri, וכן נראה מדבריו בתשובה. That's what seems also, he says, from the words in the tshuva that he wrote. She's karti b'samuch, that I mentioned close by. Shkatav v'zeh l'shano, he writes over there like this: Asur lifrosh mayabasha lesfina. It's forbidden to onboard, to board, right? I'm sorry, to board from the dry land to the boat. B'Shabbat on Shabbat. Afa im kidesh ve'achal. Even if he made kiddush and he ate there beforehand, betoch hasfina, right, on the ship. ויצא אחר כך לחוץ, and then he went out right afterwards outside. דנמצא דמפליג בשבת. So, because that turns out, right, that he's sailing on Shabbat. מיני בשב, from the ground, לים, to the ground, to the sea. אלא ייכנס לספינה מבעוד יום. But he says what he should do is board the ship when it's still day. What does that mean? Before Shabbat. ולא יצא אחר כך, shouldn't leave after that, should stay there. רבנו לפי שנסתפק לו דעת הראש, לא הזכירו. So he says, Rabbeinu, the Torah, Since he wasn't sure what is the opinion of the Rosh, he didn't mention it. That's the reason why he left it out. So you should know, he says, that the Ramban gave a different reason for this. That which we don't sail within 3 days before. קודם השבת. כתבו הר"ן פרק כמה דשבת, and the Ran wrote this in the first parak of Shabbat. Rabbeinu Yerucham, also this rabbi, והוא מפני שנראה כמי שמתנה על הגוי לחלל שבת, because it looks like, he's basically stipulating with the goy to break Shabbat. תהה ממתולה לספינה וקושרים בה כמה קשרים. So because what they do is they make some knots, right, connecting the ship, בפריסת הקלע, ודווקא כשהספינה לא הייתה, right, so in other words, they arrive to they approach the ship and make knots, he says, when it comes to spreading the sails, right, the sails. ודווקא כשהספינה לא הייתה הולכת לולא ישראל, that's only if the boat would not sail without the Jew. וברביעי וחמישי מותר, and nevertheless, right, regardless, Wednesday and Thursday it's allowed. The goy במלאכתו הוא עוסק, because the goy is working in his labor. In other words, he's doing it for himself, basically. He's working for himself. ואינו נראה כשלוחו של ישראל. So it doesn't look like he's the agent of the Jew. The kablanut הוא עוסק, because it's like more like contracting. ולפיכך בזמן הזה, so he says, therefore, in our times, כשמפליגים בספינה גדולה, שרובה גויים, so it says, when we go on a big ship, right, where it's mostly גויים, ובלא ישראל הייתה הולכת מותר, and it would have gone even without the Jews. So then it's מותר להפליג, to sail on it בערב שבת. ואפילו בשבת בים הגדול, so it says, even if you're going on Shabbat, when it comes to the Mediterranean Sea, שהוא למעלה מסר, which is high off the ground, right, it's definitely deep water. והרב מגיד כתב בפרק למד, ועכשיו נהגו, so it says Rabbi Magid, now the custom is להפליג אפילו בים הגדול, to sail even in the Mediterranean Sea בערב שבת, ערב שבת, ובשבת and also on שבת. והרמב"ן חיפש ללמד עליהם זכות. So he says the Ramban tried to justify their custom. והוא עצמו כתב והוא בא לנפש שיחוש לעצמו. So, but he writes that, right, that person who's, God-fearing should be careful, right, in other words, not to be lenient with this. Yama Rashba, so this is also the Rashba. Katav she'en devarav nechonim. He also writes that his words are not correct. So he says, but we could have defended his words, because they're all considered to be going for mitzvah. Why is that? According to Rabbeinu Tam, that the two rights close by, but he says it doesn't seem like that. Like we're going to write close by. Okay, interesting. So he says, what about halachically speaking, right? What do we do here? Again, right, same thing with the custom, he says. If the custom is to be lenient, so we can be lenient. Because they have what to rely on. Okay, so he says, the Ran says in Shabbat, Ketav Tam Acher, he gives a different reason, B'Shem HaRazah, name of the Razah. Oh, so another reason is because the seas, right, are danger, a place of danger. So 3 days before Shabbat, it's called Erev Shabbat. So it seems like, when he does this, he's stipulating to push off Shabbat, because nothing, stands in the way of danger of death. כתב ריבש, אז ריבש בתשובה, על זה לשונו ולפירושו אף כשהספינה של ישראל ומלאכיה חובליה כולם ישראלים. So he says, even if the ship is like all Jews, and also, right, the crew is also all Jews, right? והם בעצמם העושים במלאכה, and they're the ones who are doing the labor, mutar, it's allowed. כל שהוא ג' ימים קודם השבת, as long as it's 3 days before Shabbat, וכן שהוא, ככל שהוא תוך ג' ימים לשבת, and if it's within 3 days of Shabbat, asur, it's going to be forbidden. אף אם הספינה של גוי, even if the ship belongs to a goy, ואין הישראל עצמו עושה מלאכה, and the Jew himself is not doing any labor there, מכל מקום גוי עושה מלאכה בשביל ישראל, but nevertheless, right, the goy is doing labor for the Jew, הסוחרה, who's right, hiring him out, וישראל נהנה בה, and the Jew benefits from this, Shabbat on Shabbat, אלא שמפני הסכנה מותר. But he says, because of danger, it's allowed. אלא שצריך שיהיה ג' ימים קודם שבת. It has to be 3 days before Shabbat. כדי שלא יהיה נראה כמתנה לחלל שבת. So it shouldn't be like, he's gonna stipulate to break Shabbat. ולזה ברייתא דאין מפליגין בכל עניין. So it's according to this ברייתא that we don't sail in any case. בין שישראלים עושים במלאכה, whether it's the Jews doing the labor, בין שהגויים or the goyim are doing the labor, עושים אותה, בשביל ישראל, for the Jews, והוא נהנה ממנו ולהיות עניין הברייתא, and he benefits from it, the Jew. So he says that the issue of the ברייתא, אפילו כשהישראלים עצמם עושים מלאכה, applies even in case where the Jews themselves are doing the labor. ולזה אמר הרזה, regarding this, says רזה, והוא הדין להפריש במדברות, same thing also applies to, going on caravans in the desert, ובכל מקום יש סכנה, or any place of danger, שאדם עתיד לחלל בו את השבת. That person is going to come to break Shabbat because of the danger. וכיוון שהברייתא בכל עניין, גם כשהתיר לשפה, so he said, since the ברייתא, in any case, is talking about where that we're allowing this in the end, לדבר mitzvah, for a mitzvah matter. אפילו בערב שבת בכל עניין, even on ערב שבת. In any case, he says it's in any case. כשהישראל עצמו עושה החילול. When even if the Jew, אפילו, even if the Jew himself is doing the desecration of Shabbat. Okay, so that's Gimel. It was a long one. A lot of details over here. So let's go to Shulchan Aruch and see if we can sort it out. So it says in Shulchan Aruch, היכא דמותר להפליג בערב שבת. In a case where it's allowed, right, to sail on Erev Shabbat. אם נכנס בספינה בערב Shabbat. What about if he went into the ship, right, boarded the ship on Erev Shabbat, וקנה בספיתה, and he acquired a place over there, right? He checked into the room. אף על פי שמפלגת בשבת, even though right, it's going to sail on Shabbat, mutar, it's going to be allowed to do that. והוא שלא יצא מהספינה מעת שקנה בשביתה. But he says one thing, right? He's not allowed to leave the ship once he went in there. So the truth is, yesterday we did give some other opinions, which are even more lenient than this. But the Shulchan Aruch was not so lenient, like those other opinions we saw. So he makes here like sort of like a middle ground, compromise kind of a thing. So what does that mean? The fact is that the ship is sailing on Shabbat. That's what it is, like it or not, right? Take it or leave it. So how do you fix this problem? So according to this opinion, you can't board the ship on Shabbat. this is not allowed. And we saw many of the authorities, right, that don't allow this. So I can see why he goes like this, you know? It seems like a majority don't allow to board the ship on Shabbat. So therefore, the solution is, right, what do? You board the ship on Erev Shabbat, and you check into your suite and you stay there, right, until the ship sails on Shabbat. This is what you do. So if you do it this way, you're okay. Because after all, right, you boarded on Friday, you didn't board on Shabbat. So you're good. So comes the Ramah here. Says like this. Oh, so this is the other opinion, right, that I just mentioned, which is some say even if you leave the ship, it's okay. You can come back. Because once he acquired, right, the dwelling place there, right, he checked in, Me'erev Shabbat on Friday, mutar אחר כך להיכנס בשבת לפליג. You can go even on Shabbat and right to sail. יש שעושים קידוש בספינה. So apparently, right, we don't pass connect this opinion. It's a little bit more lenient, as we said, right? What does that mean? He allows you even to check in and then to right leave and then come back on Shabbat, So according to the first opinion, we don't allow this. So apparently this is not the halacha, right? But it's an opinion. So then he continues, Yesh osim kiddush besfina. Some, he says, they did kiddush in the boat. And afterwards, חוזרים לביתם, and then they go back home, ולנים שם, and they sleep there, right? Sleep at home. ומחר חוזרים לספינה ומפליגים. Then they come back to the ship, right? And they sail. So this is another opinion, right? If you do kiddush, it's okay. You can leave and come back. וכן נהגו בקצת מקומות באין להם מחות. So he says some places have a custom like this, So he says don't object to them. So what does that mean? Their custom is valid. That's their custom. It's their custom. As we saw in the Bit Yosef, right? A lot of these things go according to custom. So, if that's the local custom to be lenient, they definitely have what to rely on. Like this opinion. Yeah. So that's pretty much the story there. So I'll read this one more time just to, make sure we got it down. The various opinions here. We got like 3 opinions going here, if not 4. So what are the various opinions? First opinion is a Shulchan Aruch, right? It's Shulchan Aruch that as long as you check in on Friday, even though it's sailing on Shabbat, and you stay there, you can stay there and sail on Shabbat. That's what we're talking about. Obviously, we're talking about a case where the captain right there is a goy. He's the one who's sailing, right? The whole crew there, right, who's doing the sailing, is goyim. That's the reason why we allow this. Otherwise, we wouldn't allow a Jew, right, to sail on Shabbat.
But this wouldn't be applied for flying, correct?
Same thing for flying, It has to be, the pilot has to be a goy.
Okay.
There's no question about it. Because otherwise he's going to be breaking Shabbat. So that's the first opinion. That we allow you to check in on Friday and sail on Shabbat. Comes the second opinion, right, in the Ramah, which we saw in the Bet Yosef also, and says, right, that some even allow to check in and then leave and come back. So what does that mean? You come back on Shabbat, and it sails. Some even allow that. And then he brings another opinion that if you come in, right, and make kiddush, then you can leave and come back. So we don't pass like these opinions, but says the Ramah, some places have this custom, to do it like this. So therefore, he says, if they have this custom, leave them alone. Don't fight with them. They have what to rely on.
Is this because people are carrying luggage and there's no Eruv?
Ah, okay. So now you're coming to a good point, right? That's a whole discussion in itself, by the way, the luggage. Okay. So definitely, I can tell you right now, right? You can't carry the luggage on Shabbat, outside. Um, so what you would have to do with the luggage is bring it on Friday, and just leave it there. And hope that doesn't get stolen. But we do the best we can. But obviously, you can't bring the luggage on Shabbat because you're carrying, right? You're not allowed to carry it outside at the port, right over there at the port and all that, right? So there's no way to do that. You're also changing domains, right? It's a whole big problem there, whole big mess. So you have to bring the luggage on Shabbat. I'm sorry, on Friday, right? You have to bring it on Friday. Same thing when you have a flight, like this, you have to bring the luggage, obviously, right? Early a little bit. So it shouldn't be, handled on Shabbat. Okay, right? That's the story. So now, right? What about if you're, let's say, right, the ship came back, returned, uh, on Shabbat. So, you yourself, to get off the ship is not a big problem. But the problem is, you can't carry stuff. So why do I tell you that? Because that means, you can't bring your luggage. You certainly cannot bring the luggage off the ship, right, into the port on Shabbat, to the airport, whatever it is. That you cannot do. So the only solution you would have is to ask a goy to do it. Tip the goy, but tipping him is also an issue, right, on Shabbat. But whatever it
Probably
is, right, if
in
it's Shabbat,
advance.
I'm sorry.
Probably in advance, but also transportation from the port to wherever
Right,
you
right. Transportation. You're going to be stuck there. There's not going to be any transportation. You're going to be stuck for a while until Shabbat goes out. Right. That's pretty clear. So you're not going nowhere. So anyway, right. That's the thing. You have to get goyim to right, take your luggage off the ship or the plane. Obviously, you can't do it yourself. You have to tell them, sir. I'm a religious Jew. I need help. Please come and help me. Somebody will help you. They'll do it. Okay, whatever. It's all good. But obviously, right, you won't be able to handle. You won't have to. You won't be able to move the luggage on Shabbat. It's going to be a problem. I'm talking about when you're getting off, and going in the walking around in the port, airport, whatever it is. That's not going to work. Okay, so anyway, right, that's the story there. So we have different opinions, but really the halacha is like the first opinion, bottom line, which means that you have to board on Friday, and then if they're sailing on Shabbat, right? That's the way it is. Okay, right? That's so. You're gonna sail on Shabbat. You can just have to board on Friday and wait until they sail. Right? So be it. As we said, right? That's what it is. Okay, so let's move on. Let's try Daled. This was Gimel. Ah, so now we're talking about ground transportation, right? We talked about the ship. Now we're talking about ground. So let's see what we can do with this. So it says here the Bid Yosef. Katab od Rivash. The Rivash writes furthermore. Shalta ima yotzim b'shayra b'midbar. So what about if they're going in a caravan, right? In other words, they're traveling on the ground, right? They used to do caravans in the old days. Now we have different methods, but anyway, right? We have buses, we have cars, trains, all that stuff, right? Anyway, and he's going into the desert, right? Going through a deserted area. Ah, so here's the thing, right? They know in this situation, if they're gonna go in a caravan, that they're gonna have to break Shabbat, because when Shabbat comes, right, they're not gonna be able to keep Shabbat over there in the desert. Look what it says, right? The reason why they can't, keep Shabbat is because there's danger, because of pirates and God knows what else, right? So because of that, they can't stop. They have to keep moving all the time, you know? So they have to basically drive on Shabbat, That's basically what it is, right? In their caravan. לכן, נסתפקת עם ראוי, so he says, therefore, there's a doubt whether it's proper, למחות בידם, right? Should we object against these people who do these things? Because they're going to have to break Shabbat, right? That's the way it is. שלא ירצו בשער במדבר. They shouldn't, go into the caravan in the desert. So that was a question that they asked the Rivash. So he answers, תשובה, דבר זה מתורת הרזה. So he says, he brings it from the Raza. למדנו שנתן טעם בהאי דאין מפליגים בספינה. So he says, we see that he gives a reason. What's the reason why we don't go sail on a ship? ואין צריך צריך על העיירות. And also we cannot start a war, right, to besiege a city. של גויים, right, of the גויים, פחות מגימל ימים קודם שבת. Less than 3 days from Shabbat. משום דמקום סכנה הוא, because that's dangerous, right, there's danger involved. וכל גימל ימים קודם בשבת. So he says, therefore, right, all 3 days before Shabbat, kame Shabbata, it's called Erev Shabbat. So therefore, it looks like that he's stipulating to break Shabbat, basically, because it's inevitable. Okay. Why? Because since there's a danger of life there, right? Danger of death. So therefore they're going to have to break Shabbat in order to save their life. So he says the same thing would apply. We learn from there regarding somebody who goes in a caravan. So it says any place of danger that a person is destined, right, to break Shabbat because of danger. That's what the Raza says. So it says, according to this theory here, if a person leaves, right, the inhabited area and goes into the desert, for Bel Gimel, right, whether it's Monday or Sunday, Monday or Tuesday, mutar lefi she'elu would be allowed. Why? She'elu agimul yamin, because these 3 days mityachasim b'shavua shavra. They're really connected to the week before, juxtaposed to the week before. V'nikraim batar Shabbata. So what are they called? They're called after Shabbat. Kedita perek mishachazu miachazo, like it says in this parak, right, in Gitin, Ayin Zayin Amud Aleph, ve'en lo leimana michamat Shabbat haba. So he says a person should not refrain because of the following Shabbat, right? Haba she'az im, because if yara lo sakana, if some danger will occur, v'yitzarech lechalelo, and he's going to have to break Shabbat, mipnei pikuach nefesh, because of the danger to death. מותר הוא ואין כאן חילול אלא ביוצא מן היישוב. So it says it would be mutar, and there's not going to be any desecration of Shabbat But he says, on the other hand, right, Aval, Biltze, Mina Yishuv, Bamidbar, but if he goes from the inherited place to the desert, B'yom Dal Dehei Avav, on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Asur, it's going to be forbidden. Lefi, Shegimel Yamim Elu, Mityachasim LeShabbat Haba. Because these 3 days are already connected, right, to the following Shabbat. V'nikraim Kameh Shabbata, they're called Erev Shabbat, like, the prelude to Shabbat, whatever. And ואם כן, נראה שנכנס בכוונה למקום סכנה. So then it seems like he's going in, on purpose to a place of danger, כדי שיחלל בו את השבת. And then he's going to wind up, for sure, inevitable, right, to break Shabbat. אף על פי שהריף והרמב"ם פירשו ברייתא זו. So he says, even though the Rif and the Rambam explain this ברייתא בדרך אחרת, in a different manner, מכל מקום, Din emet, but he says the truth is, right. The rule here is truthful anyway. Doesn't matter. This explanation is also truthful, according to halacha. V'chen katav mori aran. That's what the Ran says. He says. Oh, so what do we see from here? 1 second. Yeah, so we see, right, that the Rivash was a Talmid of the Ran. Ah, there you go, right? Another link in this big chain here. Okay, that's good to know. So that means that, as we mentioned, the Rivash was one of like the latest Rishonim, the earlier authorities, because the Ran was also very late. So as we said, right, this whole chain of rabbis starts from the Ramban, who was like a little bit before these guys, and then it went to the Ritva, the Rashba, right, the Raza, and then it goes into these guys, right, the Ran, and the Rivash was the last of this chain. So these are all Spanish rabbis, from starting from the Ramban. So this is a very important period, right, in the history of Spain. The rabbis there. This is like a very important chain of tradition in that country. Okay, so anyway, right. Let's move on. ואם כן נראה כשנכנס בכוונה למקום סכנה שיחלל בו שבת, ואף על פי שהריף והרמב"ם. So it says, even though the Rif and the Rambam, we already said this. We said this. Let me just move on a little bit here. Right. So then he says, וכן כתב הרש בר צמח, right? Also the Rashbetz also writes this kind of thing. כתב עוד, he says further, the Rashbetz, שהעולה לארץ ישראל, a person who's going to Eretz Israel, right? אם נזדמנה לו שיירה. So let's say, right, he found the caravan, that goes there. אפילו בערב שבת, even ערב שבת. כיוון דדבר מצווה הוא. So he says, this is different. Why? Because it's a mitzvah, to go to Eretz Israel. So since it's a mitzvah to go to Eretz Israel, כיוון דדבר מצווה הוא, יכול הוא לפרוש ופוסק עמהם לשבות. So then he can definitely do this, he can definitely go. And he's going to tell the goyim, right, please, like rest on Shabbat. Even though they won't listen to him, right, whatever, probably they won't. And if they don't want to rest on Shabbat, he can go with them. יותר מתחום Shabbat, even more than the boundaries of Shabbat. Why? Because there's a danger there. So what does that mean? It's dangerous for him to be stagnant, right, and not move, just sit around, there. ואפילו לעריף והרמב"ם, even according to Rif and Rambam, the תחום ג' פרסות דאורייתא, that even the boundaries of 3 parsa is from the Torah. מותר לפי שאין דבר שעומד בפני פיקוח הנפש. It's still allowed, nevertheless. Why? Because danger, of life, right, is the most important thing, to save your life. ואם נכנס לעיר אחת בשבת, and if he went into a certain city on Shabbat, מהלכת כולה, he can travel throughout that city on Shabbat. ואפילו לדברי האוסרים, even according to the ones who forbid this, ביצא לדת, when he went out, went out willingly, ונכנס לעיר, and he came into the city, דשני הכה, מפני פיקוח נפש, מפני כוח נפש. So it says, because here it's different. Why? Because as we said, right, danger to life. הוא, שעבר תחומו ביציאתו בערב Shabbat. Because he left his boundaries, right, on Erev Shabbat, and he left at Erev Shabbat, Bishut Hayah. At that time it was permitted what he did. So the beginning was permitted. Im ken arem hu kemi sheotziu goim. So therefore it's considered to be like he was brought out by goim, from his boundary. Sheim nichnas le'ir me'alechet kula. That if he goes into a certain city, he can traverse the whole city. Va'afilu hinichu lechutz le'ir. So it says even if they left him outside the city, and he wants to come into the city, it's allowed. Why? Since he went out for a mitzvah matter, what's the mitzvah matter? To go to Eretz Israel. So therefore he has 2,000 amma in every direction, right? To travel. Like we say in this parak, Eruvin Mem Dal Amud Bet. Ad Ken Hashem. That's the end of it. Okay, great. So we have a lot of interesting information here, but there's even more. There is more. Okay, so let's move on. If we get lucky, we can finish this chapter today. We have to be very lucky. Let's see. So it says Uriyan Davar Mitzvah. So it says regarding, like a mitzvah matter, as we said. Piresh Rabbeinu Tam says Shekol Makom Shadam Olech Kegon L'Schora. So it says Rabbeinu Tam, right? Even if a person is going for business, for commerce, he says that's also called a mitzvah, Rabbeinu Tam, right? That's what the Torah brings this down. It says in the Mordechai like that. The Agot Kama the Shabbat, also the Agot. And they brought some sources for this. Interesting. Also in the Agot says this Perek Lamed. B'Shem Rabbeinu Tam, named Rabbeinu Tam, Rabbi also. V'Aviv Rabbeinu Yoel, also Rabbeinu Yoel. Okay. Uvashkatav Rabbeinu Didirot B'nei Chavero B'Chashuv Devar Mitzvah. He also writes, right, that to see your friend is also mitzvah. So these are two things, right, that are brought down in the Torah. That business is mitzvah, and also to see your friend is a mitzvah. That's what it says in Mordechai. But he says, Bet Yosef, he comments here that the poskim don't agree with Rabbeinu Tam regarding this, that these things are called a mitzvah. To go, for commerce or to go to see your friend. So it's because if that was the case, why would they have to, search for other reasons to allow this? That which they were accustomed to go and see, Erev Shabbat. You should be able to learn it from this, right? That if they're going, that all the people who are going, to travel in the ship, they're usually going for business, or to see your friend. And they're not just going to cruise around. That's what it says in the Rif and the Rosh implies like that. So he says that they wrote that what's the reason why we say that for mitzvah it's allowed? Because then they're going to be patur from oneg Shabbat, right? They're going to be absolved from that, since the Amar more, because it says in the Sukkah, Kaf Amud Aleph, Ha'osek b'mitzvah patur min mitzvah. The person who's doing one mitzvah, he's absolved from a different mitzvah, so therefore he's absolved. Ve'en holchin b'schora, and if they're gonna go for right commerce, chashive oskim b'mitzvah. If you're gonna tell me they're doing considered to be mitzvah, im ken patartat kol ha'olam mitzvot. Therefore, you're gonna right absolve everybody from doing a mitzvah. Ela, rather, he says, but dai leklehu ad Rabbeinu Tam. So therefore, you see from there that the poskim don't agree with Rabbeinu Tam. Ve'achi mashma ktsat me'uvda de bnei Baishan. That's the way it implies from this story, right? In the Talmud. Deita beresh perek kamakom shenahagu over there in Pesachim Nun Amud Bet. The nahug de lo azde mitzor letzidon ve'mara shabta. Because the custom was they wouldn't go from Tzor to Sidon on Erev Shabbat. Atu lekame Rabbi Yochanan. They came to Rabbi Yochanan. Amu le, and they told him, Avatin la hava efshar lehu, anan lo efshar lan. So he said, right, that our fathers, right, were able to do this, and but not us. Amar lahem kavara kiblu alehem avotechem. So Rabbi Yochanan answers them, as we said, right? We mentioned this already, that since your fathers were stringent about this, there was a custom to be stringent. So you have to continue that right stringency. You got to continue with that. So it implies, he says, that these people were definitely not going, just for to stroll around, to cruise around. The im can, if so, says, how about if Sharlehu, it would have been possible, but lo of Sharlan, and not us. Kamar, that which they said like that. And if it's true, right, that everybody who's going to cruise around is considered to be mitzvah, lama yechamiru arishonim al atzmam. So then, why the right earlier authorities? Why were they stringent upon themselves? V'chi midat hachasidutu hu lechamir adam al atzmo. So he says, bedavar mitzvah. Is it really right saintliness to be stringent when it comes to a mitzvah matter? It's not really. That's what the Rivash says in Shuvah. Shazish katav Rabbeinu, that which right the Torah said. B'shem Rabbeinu Tam and Rabbeinu Rabbeinu Tam. Kula yaterahi. So he also says, right, that this is like too much of a leniency, right, to allow right that we should consider going on business, right, and going to see your friend to be a mitzvah. So he says, nevertheless, katav shela'alot le'eretz Yisrael have shafir levar mitzvah. But he says, when you're going to Eretz Israel, that's a mitzvah. That's for sure, right? That nobody argues with that. V'chen katav Rash. That's what the Rash says also. Im nichnas adam b'sfina shlosha yamin kodem Shabbat. So it says, if a person went in, says Bet Yosef, to the ship, right, boarded the ship 3 days before Shabbat, within 3 days. Im mutar lelech ba b'Shabbat b'mayim shen ve'omkan 10 tfachim. Are you allowed, right, to go on Shabbat on that ship in the water, which doesn't have the depth of 10 tfachim? Itbarer od b'siman tav daled. We're going to explain that different chapter. He says, b'siyata d'ishmaya tav daled 404. That's really down the road. Kitzad mutar likanes b'sfina b'Shabbat. So it says also, right? How do you board the ship on Shabbat? That's a different question, right? That's in chapter Shin Lamed Tet, right? 339. It's going to be later on. Okay, fine. So we got all these things going on here. So I think we're done with this chapter. Bet Yosef, we got to do Shulchan Aruch. Let's see what we got there. So it says like this, Shulchan Aruch, Hayotzim b'shayra b'midbar. Let's say, as we said, right, they're going out in the caravan in the desert. V'akol yodim shehem tzrichim lechalel Shabbat. So they all know, right, that they're going to have to break Shabbat, when they're doing this. Right? Ki mipnei sakana lo yuchlu le'akev b'midbar b'Shabbat levadam. Because as we said, right, because of the danger, they're gonna have to move around. They can't become stationary in the middle of the desert. Too dangerous to do that. They're gonna have to keep moving. So they're gonna have to drive on Shabbat, basically, right? And that's basically what it is. וביום הראשון ובשני ושלישי מותר לצאת. So he says, in a case like this, I skipped something. Let me just read this again. Right, so it says, Gimel Yamin Kodem Shabbat Asurim Latzet. If it's 3 days before, right, within 3 days before Shabbat, they're not allowed to do this, go on the caravan. This is the halacha. So meaning what? That it's the same thing as going on the ship, but it's really for a different reason, because here they know they're gonna have to break Shabbat. There's no way, right, to avoid that. But when it comes to the ship, though, or a plane, right, there, there's a captain, there's a pilot, whatever. So he's the one who's breaking Shabbat, not really you. You're just sitting there. So it's not exactly the same thing. So in other words, this situation has its own problem. The problem is surely you're gonna have to break Shabbat, traveling in the desert on Shabbat. You can't stop. So therefore, the rabbis told you, don't do this on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Right? It's too close to Shabbat. So what do? Go Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. That you can do. That's what he says here, right? Uvayom Rishon V'Sheni Shlishi Mutar Letzet. So, but when it comes to, right, as we said, those days are allowed. Ve'im echad achar kach yara lo sakana. So it says if afterwards there's going to be some kind of danger. They're going to have to break Shabbat because it's danger of death. Right? Mutar, then it will be allowed to break Shabbat. Since they're in the desert, they have no choice. Right? It's life and death situation, so they have to break Shabbat. Then can chilul. Therefore, it's going to be allowed. So now it brings the other case, right? Which is, what about if you're traveling to Eretz Israel? So there we're more lenient. Why? Because it's a mitzvah matter, right? To go to Israel. So he says, therefore, if he happens to get a caravan, even on Erev Shabbat. Since it's a mitzvah matter, so here we allow it, right? Even within 3 days. Because it's a mitzvah thing. So what do? You got to tell them, please, don't drive on Shabbat, please, 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 please. They won't listen to you, but you got to do your own thing, right? You got to do your own, right? Then leave the rest to Hashem. If they don't want to listen to you, that's their problem. So if they don't want to do it in the end, right? As they probably won't. So what can you do? You can go out, of the his boundary, town boundary, because of danger of life. And if he came to a certain city on Shabbat, he can go through the whole city. Right, as we said. Even if they left him outside the city, right? The drivers. But city Knesset, and he wants to go into the city mutar, he's allowed. Why is that? Because since he went from mitzvah, so we allow him to do these things. The rabbis waived the prohibitions here. Because when he's going from mitzvah, we give him 2,000 amot in each direction. Okay, fine. So then he goes on to the Ramah. Yesh אומרים שכל מקום שאדם הולך לסחורה, right, so he brings that opinion of Rabbeinu Tam, right, that we saw. Some say that if you go for a commerce, right, or to see your friend, חשוב הכל לדבר מצווה. It's considered to be a mitzvah matter, right? We always said, right, we don't paskin like that. ואינו חשוב דבר הרשות. רק כשהולך לטייל, it's only when he's going to just stroll around. ועל כן נהגו בקצת מקומות, so he says, therefore some places are accustomed, to be lenient. right? Le'akel le'inyan b'fakat sinot, regarding right ships and all this, ve'alichad sha'ara, and also the caravans. Toch shlosha yamim, within 3 days, because of this opinion of Rabbeinu Tam, as we mentioned, right? But we don't paskin like that. Ki chashuvim hakol davar mitzvah, because they're all considered mitzvah. Ve'en imchot bi'adan, so therefore he says, don't object to them. Ha'il ve'yesh lehem al she'yismochu, because they have what to rely on, right? But according to what we saw in the Bet Yosef, right, he didn't really want to rely on this at all. Right, so therefore, right, the Sfaradim should be not lenient with this. They should not be lenient. They should be stringent and not rely on this. And even according to Ramah, right, it's only a place where it's customary to do so. But otherwise, right, I don't think he would allow it either. Okay, great. So, yeah, so we did finish a chapter, so I guess we'll stop here, B'ezrat Hashem. And next time we'll begin the new one, God willing. Right, so thanks for coming. Be blessed with wealth and health and happiness. Chazak Baruch, Laila Tov, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Thank you, Rabbi.
All the best.